indisposed at the moment, but they'll ring the bell as soon as they're ready to come in. Are there matters that need to be brought up before we go into the next session of our case?
Yes, Your Honor. We spoke yesterday briefly. I would just ask that after instructions are read before the jury goes out, if the court we could have the brief sidebar.
Absolutely.
Before they exit.
Oh, absolutely.
Thank you.
Nothing from the state, Judge. Thank you.
We did have one request from the jurors, and they have asked for a flip chart and markers for the jury room. So what do you all say to that? The court is able to provide a clean flip chart and able to provide markers if that is something that the parties agree to. And that can be done at some point.
The state has no objection to that.
Agreed.
So we will answer that in the affirmative, and I'll just deal with that at some point. You all should have gotten copies of the instructions. I know you maintain any objections, but they are as we agreed as far as the language based on the court's rulings from yesterday, and you have the court's inserted polling instruction. Hopefully that is the full packet, though, so that everybody can read along. I have 12 copies without the last discharge instruction or the polling instruction for the jurors to read along at the time that the court is reviewing the instructions at the conclusion of closings. So those are your copies to follow along.
Thank you, Your Honor.
The courtroom does appear to be more full today. We are going into closing arguments today for the benefit of those of you that are observing. Closings are the opportunity for the attorneys to wrap up and tell the jurors what they believe has taken place during this trial. You are welcome to sit, watch, listen, and observe the court proceedings. The same instructions apply and that have continued to apply, which is there's not to be disruption, interruption. If you have any personal reaction to any of the things that you hear, you should keep it to yourself. If you feel that you are unable to maintain your sense of courtroom decorum, we ask that you please excuse yourselves quietly. The door won't slam. We worked on trying to make sure that it's a quiet exit. But you are, as long as you feel comfortable that you can sit and listen without reaction, verbal or audible reaction, you are certainly welcome to sit and observe the proceedings. Do you need to change that around, Corey? Okay, thank you. That's fine. What I plan to do is have you all do your closings, and then we'll take a break. Before I go into instructions, I'm asking IT to put the easel over in 2A. You all can look it through, and then when they come in for instructions, they will go in and put the easel and markers and pads in the 2B jury room, so they're waiting. So that way you all have a chance to flip through and see that the markers are ready and the pad is clean. But I figured that's a good time to do that. Okay?
Thank you.
Thank you. Our jurors have not yet indicated their readiness to join us. That's why we're waiting on our jurors. I'm also presuming that all of you know that regular felony court is going on next door in 2A. If you happen to have come in here thinking you're in regular felony court, it is not here. It is next door. So you can go ahead and go over there if that's where you meant to be. Sounds like our jurors are ready. If you'll bring in our jurors, thank you.
All rise for the bench of the jury. Bench. You may be seated.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning. Has anyone attempted to approach you or speak with you, or have you learned anything about this case between the time we separated yesterday and got back together today?
No.
Thank you. Now, ladies and gentlemen, both the state and the defendant have rested their cases. The attorneys will now present to you their final arguments. Please remember that what the attorneys say is not evidence, nor is it your instruction on the law. However, do listen closely to their arguments. They are intended to aid you in understanding the case. Each side has equal time. The state will give its closing argument first, and then the defense will have the opportunity to respond. State?
Thank you, Judge. Good morning.
Good morning.
For about 2.5 weeks, I have talked in front of you, but I've not had a chance to talk to you. And now is that opportunity. And the first thing I want to say to you all is thank you very much for doing what you are here to do. Your attention, your time, your sacrifices are truly appreciated. So the reason we're here is that on Wednesday, January 23rd of 2019, at approximately 12:32 in the afternoon, the defendant walked into the SunTrust Bank on South 27 in Sebring, and he murdered 5 innocent women. When you were selected as jurors, you were told that not all first-degree murder cases are death penalty cases. There are only a few first-degree murder cases that are shockingly evil, pitiless, consciencelessness. Only a few cases where a defendant is cold and calculating, that's having a careful plan, and that it's a product of calm and cool reflection. And I believe the evidence in this case has shown that that is exactly what this case is. This defendant came to Sebring for a fresh start, and he got it. He got away from the problems of Indiana. He got to live in a new home. He got a new car. He got a new job, the best paying job he's ever had, with co-workers that he liked and co-workers that liked him. And he got a new bank account at the SunTrust. One of the quotes in and amongst the social media is, in spite of all these new things, the defendant was once quoted as saying, "But I don't want new things. I want the things I want." And what did the defendant want? The defendant wanted is to see what it would like to truly kill. On Wednesday, January 23rd, he finally did what he had planned to do, not just for weeks in advance or a day in advance or the morning of, but for years. And he didn't murder one person to truly know what it would be like to kill. He killed 5. He watched them laying there on the floor. They were under his control, for his enjoyment, as he shot each one. And as he shot each one, they cried and said, "Why?" And he continued to shoot. And he told the police about their cries and pleas as he shot them. Ladies and gentlemen, that's conscienceless. That is pitiless. So, the court's going to read you some instructions about the death penalty. And you probably remember in jury selection there was a lot of talking about aggravating factors and things like that. And in Florida, the death penalty is only appropriate in certain cases. And the state must prove beyond a reasonable doubt at least one aggravating factor for you as jurors to consider recommending the death penalty. The first aggravating factor is the defendant was previously or contemporaneously convicted of another capital felony. First-degree murder is a capital felony. And in this case, while he stands convicted, you actually watched the murders. So it's not just a piece of paper that says you've got a conviction or a statement by the judge that he's been convicted. You actually got to see what it was. 5 contemporaneous killings. I would suggest to you, ladies and gentlemen, that that has been proven beyond any reasonable doubt. Aggravating factor number 1. Number 2 is called heinous, atrocious, and cruel. And again, we talked about that in jury selection, that those are bad words, and they have definitions. Heinous means extremely wicked or shockingly evil. Atrocious means outrageously wicked and vile. Cruel means designed to inflict a high degree of pain with utter indifference to or even enjoyment of the suffering of others. The instruction goes on to say the kind of crime intended to be included as especially heinous, atrocious, or cruel is one accompanied by additional acts that show that the crime was conscienceless or pitiless and was unnecessarily torturous, in this case, to each of those innocent victims. You watched in this video as the defendant savored the minutes of power and control that he had over those women. Knowing they were locked in the bank, waiting. They were first corralled into one area at gunpoint. Was this a robbery? They were told to lift up their shirts so their waists could be seen to ensure they had no weapons to defend themselves. They were made to lay on the floor face down. What will happen? He's not asked for money. There's no open the drawers. So what is going through their mind as they now lay there with a gunman? The defendant stands over them and looks at them. Now you remember from the video, he doesn't start shooting right away. He stands with a smirk on his face. And he even looks at his gun a little bit as he's savoring that moment. As they lay on the floor wondering what's going to happen. Then he takes aim. Indifferent, enjoying the moment that he has of power and control. One of the defendants quotes, "It's all I think about every day. Blood, death, and murder." And after his pause, that reflection, he begins to shoot. You watched each one of the victims systematically shot, one at a time. And I suggest that after that first gunshot, all 5 of them knew that this was not a robbery and that they were going to die. Each second now becomes an eternity as they wait. helpless on the floor, not knowing when they were going to die or what order they would die. And by the defendant's own statement, crying and asking why. And the defendant kept shooting, pitiless to their crying, pitiless to their asking why. Conscienceless, pitiless, and unnecessarily torturous to each victim as they lay and waited. To execute 5 innocent women in the fashion that it was done is indeed heinous, atrocious, and cruel. The enjoyment of seeing suffering comes from the defendant's own words again. Quote, "Those screams, ooh, I'm sure they'd be glorious and beautiful," end quote. Quote, "My heart races as I crave the taste of blood and mayhem," end quote. Quote, "I thrive on chaos and it makes me feel whole," end quote. "I can't help what I love, and I love seeing death and destruction." That's what's in the mind of this defendant. That is heinous, atrocious, and cruel. Now we move to aggravating factor number 3. And that is what's called cold calculated and premeditated. And the court will read the following. The first-degree murder was committed in a cold, calculated, and premeditated manner without any pretense of moral or legal justification. Cold means the murder was a product of calm and cool reflection. Calculated means having a careful plan or prearranged design to commit murder. A killing is premeditated if it occurs after the defendant consciously decides to kill. The decision must be present in the mind at the time of the killing. The law does not fix an exact period of time that must pass between the formation of the premeditated intent to kill and the killing. But the period of time must be long enough to allow reflection by the defendant. The premeditated intent to kill must be formed before the killing. A substantial period of reflection. The defendant sat in his car outside of the bank for at least a period of time before he went in. And we know that he texted Amani Davis about what he was about to do. That's substantial reflection alone. Because he sat there for a while and he communicated what he was going to do. But you can go backwards to the night before, where he wrote a text to his deceased friend about, "You're not going to like what I do, and I will see you in hell tomorrow." And it goes backwards and backwards and further and further. This had been planned for a very long time. The specific location had been planned, we believe, about a week or so before. So let's look at some of the things that happened. On January 7th, 2019, the defendant entered the SunTrust Bank where the murders occurred, and he deposited an $800 and something check, and we saw a video of that bank interaction where he walked in with his collared shirt, talked to the clerk. On January 8th, the next day, he returned to the SunTrust Bank and he withdrew $300. And that was at about 2:59 p.m., you might remember. And within a half an hour, he was at the Boom Boom's gun store, filling out the paperwork and buying a firearm. The same one used in the murders. On January 9th, the following day, he quit his job at Avon Park. and he joined an online group called Suicide Isn't the Solution, and then deleted that entry. On January 10th, he's not even picked up the gun yet. 13 days before the murder, he authors a note in his cell phone, and it ends, "I wonder what it would truly be like to kill." Cold, calculated, and premeditated, substantial reflection. 2 days after authoring that note, he enters the gun store a second time and gets his gun. January 16th, 4 days later, he goes online on his cell phone and he joins a group called Murderous Thoughts and then deletes the entries. 2 days later, 5 days before these killings, he goes on to another website, a chat group called Murder and Stuff, a website that discusses serial murders and cases and that kind of thing. And he asks the moderator, "So do you know what happens to the family of a killer if the killer is killed while the police are trying to capture him or her? Like, are they fined, punished, or meh?" "I don't know," is the response. The defendant responds with, "I can't ever find the answer no matter where I look." How often do you look for that answer to find out what happens? The following day, he goes back to Boom Boom's gun store, not knowing the answer to the question, what happens to the family of a killer who is killed while the police are trying to capture him? And he buys a steel protected vest. It's the same vest that he pointed to the day that he purchased, not picked up, but purchased the handgun back on January 8th. The night before the homicides, January 22nd, at around 11 o'clock at night, he sends a text to Chandler, his friend from childhood, who has died in December of 2016. And in part, it reads, "I know I'll see you in hell tomorrow, and I know you won't like me for everything I've done. I miss you, asshole, and I'm beating your ass when I get to hell." Because he knows what he's going to do the next day. And he also knows that it's wrong. And even Chandler, the guy that overdosed on heroin, would know it was wrong. On January 23rd at 7:42 in the morning, the defendant begins his long string of Google messaging with Imani. Takes Imani by surprise. You heard from Imani. She was in that long-time relationship with him online, but they FaceTimed, they chatted for hours. Fall asleep and wake up the next day and you're still on the phone. Imani's surprised to get the, "Hey, what's up?" And they begin to chat. It's been about 6 months since they've talked. She still lives in Connecticut. And they've had this on and off relationship for about 3 years, sharing the most intimate of details. He tells her at 8:34 in the morning, "This is the best day of my life." And he's going to explain a bit about why later on. At 8:55, he tells her that he's laying in bed thinking. What is he going to do? He knows what he's going to do. Cold, calculated, and premeditated. with substantial time to think. At 9:04, he tells her he's thinking about horrible things, and it'll tell you around noon or so in 3 hours. And within seconds, he does a web search in his phone for the word SunTrust. They continue to text through this Google Hangouts app for the next couple hours, and at 11:53, just prior to noon, he says, I'm getting dressed, brushing my teeth, and I'll tell you why I'm excited and having a damn good day. At 12:04, he texts, I'm here and done and ready. Cold calculated and premeditated. At 12:14, he tells her the news. I'm dying today. Yep, today's the day. And about 15 minutes later, as he sits in his car, he writes to her and says, but the fun part, going back to heinous, atrocious, and cruel, the fun part, and he uses an expletive, the fucking cliche clincher, is that I'm not going out alone. I'm taking a few people with me because I've always wanted to kill people. So I'm going to try it and see how it goes. Watch me on the news, Sebring, Florida. Within a minute and a half, he walks into the bank. There is no confusion. There is a careful plan. Think about that. There is a careful plan. He's watched customers go in and out of the bank. And in fact, there's a male customer that walks out in that video, and he waits. He pauses. See the man get into his car, and the defendant walks and stops and looks and waits to see that car back out and then begin to move to leave the parking lot before the defendant turns his head back toward the door with a smirk on his face. He corrals the women into one area. Careful plan. He checks them for weapons. He directs Marisol to lock the doors. This is not a crazy run around inside. This is a careful plan that has been thought out. Makes each one of them show that they're not armed. Makes them lay down so that they're defenseless. And then methodically and systematically shoots them. Cold, calculated, and premeditated. Having a careful plan or prearranged design to commit murder. I said to you earlier, this plan doesn't go back just to that morning or to the week before or to the week the gun was purchased. This goes back years. Again, Amani Davis told you that when they first met around 2015, the defendant would have been about 17, 18 years old. He was obsessed with murder and death. And so was she, but it was in a different way. She was curious about serial murders, and she was curious about death. I think at one point she said she was into forensic science and might have wanted to go into some kind of a forensic pathology or something like that. But the defendant was different because he was interested in how to do it. Torture, death. He had told her he'd been kicked out of school because of a dream about barricading his classmates into a room and then killing them. Not all of them, but waiting for some of them and then torturing them before he killed them. According to Imani, as you recall from her testimony, the defendant continued to have a fascination with death and killing, up until the point that he joined the Army. And you probably recall her testifying, one of the things that he was looking forward to was being able to bring home a skull as a trophy so that he could eat out of it. You remember her reaction. That was pretty morbid and pretty creepy. So while in boot camp in Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, he meets Erica Chevalot. And you heard from her. They met in basic training. They became friends, acquaintances. And she noticed that he seemed to have an embrace making people feel uncomfortable. That creepy persona seemed to make him happy. And then there was the day where he passed the waterproof notepad to her that says, "I'm having homicidal ideations. I want to feel like killing people." She told him, "You probably ought to go tell somebody about that." And as a result, he was discharged from the Army in June of 2016, thinking about death and killing people. About a year later, Erica, who is now in the Army Reserve in Michigan, wonders what happened to her former battle buddy from boot camp. And because of his unique name, she looks him up, and they begin to talk. Many of the quotes that I will read to you later come from those conversations. They rekindled an acquaintance, friendship, and all of those online communications are in evidence. But there was also the phone calls through Google Messenger, or however you talk through those apps, where they could actually physically talk to each other. And during one of those, you recall probably that she testified that he expressed going into a bank and getting killed by the police, locking a bank and going into a bank and then getting killed by the police, suicide by cop. And that concerned her to the point that she actually went to the police department and reported it. The defendant came to Sebring sometime around May of 2018 to get a fresh start. And he got it. New home, new car, new job, new bank account. I don't want new things. I want the things I want. And this is what this defendant wanted. He wanted to drive to Sunbank and murder. And he waited until that male customer left. He waited till he left the bank. He waited until he got into his car. And he waited until that car began to back up, to leave. And he waited until those front wheels turned and that car was leaving before he entered the bank. And he wanted to go into the bank to kill. So he walked up to the teller. There's no distress. There's a smile. And he wanted to pull the gun out because he's in charge. And there's a smirk. And he wanted those women to be corralled into one area where they would be defenseless. And at this point, he wanted the doors locked. And Marisol Lopez locked one set of doors. And he wanted the other set of doors locked. And Marisol Lopez locked the second set of doors. Now he wanted all of them in the same area where he could watch them all. And he wanted each one of them to show that they had no weapons. And he wanted them to lay on the floor, face down. Now he's savoring the moment that he is in control, because that's what he wants. He looks at his gun, he looks at it again, and what he wants to do is kill. And all this time, these women are wondering what is going to happen until that moment, when they know what is going to happen to them. Systematically murdered. And as they cry and ask him why, he continues to shoot. It is heinous, atrocious, and cruel. It is cold, calculated, and premeditated. And he looks at his gun again, because what he's been able to do. The 911 call. Why did you shoot those women? I wanted to see if I could do it. I don't want new things. I want the things I want. The defendant wanted to kill, and he did it. Hang on one second. Go. So why? Why? You heard the state doctors. There is no tumor. There is no tumor. And even if it was, it is so small that it's not pressing on anything. There is no tumor. There is no brain damage. That's what all those objective functioning tests, executive functioning tests show. He is average. Slightly above average in some categories, slightly below average in others. There is no behavior or emotion evidencing distress or auditory hallucinations. In fact, when it is claimed, the doctors say, I don't see anything in the way he presents. You see that throughout the records, and you've heard the experts. The defendant is simply a person who acts against social norms. Think about that. From when he was little, didn't want to do his homework, didn't want to go to school, didn't want to play football, wasn't worried about disappointing his parents or his teachers or his family, because he wanted to do what he wanted to do. You heard that he is deceitful. You heard that he is calculating. You heard that he lacks empathy. And he is an opportunist. And he wants what he wants. All of which are under his conscious control. And that's what you have seen during this entire trial and the presentment of evidence, from whatever source it came. It is under his conscious control. Don't want new things, I want the things I want. When my heart beats out of my chest and I can't contain a thirst for blood, when I so much as think of it, let alone smell or taste it. Yes, I believe it's called a need. I wish people understood that it's not a focus on unhealthy ideas or things. It's all I can think of. It's all I hear every day. It's all I see every day. It's all I smell and taste every day. Blood, death, and murder. It's all I have happening 24/7. And I have moments in between the thoughts and scenarios that can occupy my mind for moments at a time. But it all goes back eventually. What I need is people who don't worry about my mental health and try to have a relationship with me. But that's impossible because everyone is emotional and loves nitpicking another's mind, myself included. That's not a guarantee with anyone as per our human nature of violence, being one of two of our initial outcomes to embarrassment or from anger portrayed to us. It's never guaranteed anyone will live or die when they should or shouldn't. You walk both sides while I'm drowning in a pool of darkness. That's generally how shit works. But see, here's the problem. If you fall on my side of the fence during this point in time, you'll never get out. The pool or ocean of darkness is like tar. Once you're in it, there's no escape. And trust me, you can take the man or woman out of the darkness, but you'll never take the darkness out of them. It's always there, and once you've tasted it, you are hooked. I just crave something that I can't get. Honestly, a demon, straight up evil, an individual who is the embodiment of sin. I crave to look into someone else's eyes and see that same hatred and bloodlust that I have. We had a debate and she lost. She kept spewing out bullshit like no one has the right to determine when someone else's life ends. That was annoying. Who cares if we kill? We were designed to. I just imagine people hanging upside down in chains over a fire. Ooh, I wonder how long it'd take to break your boyfriend. What do you think I should start with? His nails or his teeth? Nails are more sensitive, but teeth are necessary to eat and more. Which sounds less fun to be without? And what to start with? I could dislocate all of his joints without causing permanent damage. Those screams, oh, I'm sure they'd be glorious and beautiful. I could fall asleep hearing things pop out of place. 1 sheep, 2 sheep. Sheep doesn't sound right. I was going to say this isn't a dangerous mood. A dangerous mood for me is when I have broken your wrists and ankles and laugh maniacally as you attempt to crawl away. Don't you think a human crawling away in agony is funny? I don't know if you really understand this. I'll put it simply for you. I am fucking insane. I love the idea of murdering people. It's a humorous thing to imagine as humans are weak. I don't want to be fixed as I am not broken. I'll see you in hell tomorrow, and know that you're not going to like what happened, and you won't like me for everything I've done. I hate you for it all, the memories and joy, and the fact that you kept me here just to do that. I miss you, asshole, and I'm beating your ass when I get to hell. My vision blurs as I see nothing but red. My mind runs thick with thoughts so horrid that even I admit they're not good. I wish to speak of it to someone, anyone, but I'm not able to, in worry of being shunned and locked up again. My head aches from all the faux screams and crying. My vision blurs as I see nothing but death. My mind melts as the screams and begging for mercy drown out everything I hear. The blood I see wherever I look, I cannot wash the blood from my skin. The faces and emotions of those I kill are burned into my memory to the point that I feel I've known them my entire life. My body aches as I feel the drain of all the death and murder. I can hardly make a fist without effort. My heart races as I crave the taste of blood and mayhem. I thrive on chaos, and it makes me feel whole. I can't help what I love, and I love seeing the death and destruction. I wonder what it'd be like to truly kill. The defendant is simply a person who acts against social norms. He is deceitful. He is calculating. He lacks empathy. He's an opportunist. And he wants what he wants. All of which are under his conscious control. Ladies and gentlemen, members of the jury, this is one of those cases. This is one of those first-degree murders. The state is asking you, the members of this jury, to return a recommendation of the death penalty as an option in this case for each of these 5 murders that this defendant has been convicted of. Thank you.
The evidence we presented to you was not an excuse. It was not a justification. It was not a defense. Because there is no excuse, there is no justification, and there is no defense for what Zephan did. We presented you with the explanation of how Zephan, who you heard described as that sweet little boy, became the Zephan who walked into the bank and did what he did. What Zephan did is wrong. We know it. He knows it. And you know it. And how do we know that? We know that because he pled guilty to 5 counts of first-degree murder. And when he pled guilty, it took that part of this trial that could have been about blame and responsibility. He took that away. By entering his guilty pleas, he said, I accept blame. I accept responsibility. He accepted responsibility for what he did immediately. When he called 911, he gave himself over to the police, and he gave his confession. Zephan will be held accountable for his actions. What Zephan did may make you angry at him. It may make you feel vengeful. The jury instruction that the judge will give you says, do not make this decision because you are angry at anyone. You may recall the government's cross-examination of some of our witnesses. He got confrontational with them. He got angry with them. He brought that emotion into this courtroom. People are taught to not make decisions based on anger, based on vengeance. We're taught to calm down, take a moment, and pause. Raising yourself above anger, raising yourself above vengeance, it is hard to do. It is hard to do. Desmond Tutu spoke of revenge when he said, to take a life when a life has been lost is revenge, not justice. You said, members of the jury, you said that life in prison without the possibility of parole was an acceptable punishment for someone who committed 5 first-degree murders, for someone who committed the 5 first-degree murders with the aggravating factors that have been presented to you. You said you did not believe in an eye for an eye. If you did, you would not be here. If you believed that every murderer deserved the death penalty, you would not be here. We ask you to honor that promise, that oath that you took. And if one of us, myself, my co-counsel, if one of us has done something that makes you angry at us, please don't hold it against Zephan. We did not intend to do that. Please do not hold that against Zephan and do not use it in your consideration. Our justice system depends on the courage and the independence of jurors. You cannot make this decision based on what you think the community wants or what anyone else wants. This is your decision. You have to have the courage to do what is uncomfortable. You have to be brave enough to follow your heart. If you do, you will know that life is the right sentence in this case. based on who the human being is that did it. Mitigation. We've talked about mitigation since the very beginning of this trial. What is it? Mitigation is defined as anything that you individually choose to use to vote for life in prison without the possibility of parole, or to not vote for death. You do not have to be able to articulate it. You don't have to be able to point to it. You don't have to be able to put words to it. You can if you want. You don't have to. We are talking about an issue of morality, your moral compass. The law says you do not have to be able to justify your decision. Think of what it would be like if somebody came up to you on the street and said, "Oh, I notice you're married or you're not married. Justify that to me." That's a moral decision that you have made. You're not going to justify that to somebody. If somebody says to you, "Well, you follow Christianity? Why do you do that? Justify that to me." That's a moral decision. You don't have to justify those decisions to anyone else. If the aggravation that has been presented in this case, if you believe it's been proven, you have to look in your heart about what you have seen that is mitigating. It could be a witness we put on the stand. It could be something they said about Zephan, something they said, you say, "That's important to me. I am factoring that in." The judge will give you an instruction about the mitigation, and you'll be provided a list of 28 items identified as mitigation. One of these items says, the existence of any other factors in Zephan's background that would mitigate against imposition of the death penalty. There's another instruction. It says, a mitigating circumstance may include any aspect of the defendant's character, background, or life, or any circumstance of the offense that may indicate the death penalty is not appropriate in this case. So, if you find something, if something is mitigating to you that is not on that list of 28 that are in the jury instructions, you can consider it. It doesn't have to be on that list. And no one else has to agree with you about what you think is mitigating. It does not have to be unanimous. It is you and you alone. And if someone says to you in that jury room, "What you just said is mitigating," no, that's not mitigating. That's not mitigating. It's not mitigating to me, so it shouldn't be mitigating to you. You're not allowed to do that. Because for you, it's your decision. You decide for yourself. And the law tells you that you weigh the aggravation, you weigh the mitigation, and you make your own individual determination. You decide, does the aggravation outweigh the mitigation? And this is not a mathematical weighing process. You'll be told this. Even if you find all 3 aggravating factors have been proven to you, and you find just one mitigator, it's not mathematical. It's not 3 here and 1 here, so it's the death penalty. That's not how this process works, because you can give any one mitigator the weight of life. That doesn't mean that you discount the aggravation. It means that you have found that one thing that for you gets the weight of life. The government has dehumanized Zephan. They read the terrible messages over and over. They show you the video. They want you to see him as a cold, angry murderer. And why do they do that? Because if you label him this way, if you make him just a cold, angry murderer, it is much easier for you to kill him. It's just reducing him to his worst act. Zephan's actions at the bank were his own, and he takes responsibility for them. The government wants you to collapse Zephan into just that moment in the bank, but they don't know him. They've not met him. The law requires you to consider Zephan's whole life when you make this decision, when you make the decision whether or not to take his life. It's easier to label Zephan than to accept who he is. A broken, brain-damaged, mentally ill person. So I'll talk a little bit about some of the specifics of the mitigation, some of the evidence that we've presented to you. We presented to you friends of Zephan, family members of Zephan, daycare providers, teachers. And what do they tell you? Zephan was a quiet, a sweet little boy. He was shy, he was quiet, but he was kind to others. You heard from Michelle Cross, one of the friends and daycare providers. She said, Zephan was very comfortable with our family, very comfortable. But when we would take him on our family vacations and he would be around people he didn't know, do you remember what she said? She said he would gag on his food at the table. He's not comfortable being in that environment. You heard from Brandon and Liz Ritchie. You heard from Angie and Lance Kane. You heard from Mike Mitchell. And you could hear, Mike Mitchell was Misty's ex-husband. You could hear in Mike Mitchell's voice the love that he still has for Zephan. You heard from Lori Walter. She was one of the witnesses that appeared by video. Lori Walter said, Zephan helps her daughter every day. She talks about him every day. She stays on the straight path because of Zephan. She doesn't want to be locked up like Zephan is. Lori said that Zephan saved her daughter's life and theirs. And think about the phone calls, the text messages that she testified about that Zephan had with her daughter. Those are not the actions of someone who is just a cold, emotionless, lacking in empathy person. He helped her to not commit suicide. He helped her to not go lay down in the road and be run over. You heard from Zephan's teachers. He was quiet. We didn't have behavior problems with him, they said. He was quiet. We couldn't get through to him. He wouldn't do his work, and we couldn't get through to him. Nikki Rumpler said, he looked through me. It just didn't really seem to register with him. I would summarize Zephan's early years, his home life, those early childhood years as this. There was a pattern of dysfunction. Zephan did not know what it was like to grow up in a home where he had two parents working together, focused on making his life what it could be. He got a glimpse every now and then over the years. You heard about Christy, the woman who Josh was with and then married to when Zephan was little and came to live with him. Christy provided that place of comfort. She brought security to the home, organization, you heard, to the home. But she left and took baby brother Hunter with her. Home wasn't a safe place for Zephan, and where was home anyway? When you look at the pictures of Zephan, when you heard the teachers talk about him, the daycare providers, the friends, you heard him described as this lovable, sensitive, sweet boy. The kid that they described as they would be happy to have as their own. That's the same person. That's the same person who killed 5 people in January of 2019. As Zephan is aging, as Zephan is growing up a little bit, we see that that lovable child has turned into a very troubled adolescent, and that period of time when you're moving into adolescence, Zephan really never made it to the other side successfully. He wasn't interested in school anymore, we heard that. And his grandfather, Josh's father, that Zephan was close to, he suddenly died. And then Christy leaves. His stepmom leaves with his baby brother. And Zephan's mom at this time, Misty, well, she's with Bruce Bannister. Josh had financial loss. He lost his business. He lost the vehicle. They lost their family home. And this is this critical stage of Zephan's life in early adolescence. And he didn't know how to navigate it. He didn't have the tools he needed to do this. I posed a question to you in my opening statement. I said, what is happening in this young boy's life? What is happening to his brain that makes a 9-year-old want to die? Zephan's journey through the mental health system begins. You've heard the talk about the football. He played football. And his father, big into football, he's a sports guy. Zephan, you heard, didn't want to play. It was not his thing. Zephan was not the athlete. Zach, his brother, yes, very much. Zephan, not so much. In 10th grade, in the fall, Zephan has the football hit, the hit to his head, and he has the concussion. And then we heard the testimony also that shortly after that, he was hit in the back of his head by his brother, and Zephan failed his impact testing 6 times. So his parents, they take him, his dad takes him to the doctor, and they start checking him out, what's going on. He's 15 years old, November of 2012. And Zephan tells Dr. Stilson, I'm having homicidal thoughts. I'm having suicidal thoughts. I have thoughts about hanging myself. Zephan at this time is socially isolated. He's spending time in his room. He's playing his video games. But he starts seeing Patrick O'Connell. Patrick O'Connell tells us, Zephan tells me he's having suicidal thoughts. He's having homicidal thoughts. Patrick O'Connell tells us he has major depressive disorder. And we know from Mr. O'Connell and his records, which you have in evidence, Josh was more aggravated with the school for kicking his son out than he was concerned about his suicidal son. So Zephan now lives with Mom. He moves out of Josh's house. He now moves in with his mom. And Zephan is talking with Amani, who he's met online, a girl who Zephan says to Patrick O'Connell, a girl who loves me and will make all my pain go away. Amani told you, Zephan was a safe place for me. I think it was 5 times that she used that word. He was a safe place for me. We talked about everything she said, from murder and mayhem to marriage. We had 72-hour-long calls. Zephan talked to Imani about his mental health struggles. He talked to her about suicide. He was disappointed that he was not able to commit suicide. He was disappointed he was still alive. That's what Imani told you. And she told you that Zephan talked with her about her suicide attempts. And Zephan helped her. When they were on the phone and she wanted to commit suicide, Zephan helped her. Zephan was her suicide hotline. He helped her through it. These are not the actions of someone who goes against societal norms. These are not the actions of someone who does not have empathy, who does not care, who is not capable of caring about another person. Zephan attempts suicide. He goes on the roof, he's got a rope, he wants to hang himself. But he calls the suicide helpline, and he ends up not doing it. He's hospitalized, and there's actually a positive here that comes out of this hospitalization, which Zephan found that he sort of has a newfound purpose in life. He says, and this is what he says to Patrick O'Connell, I was able to help some of the other patients in the behavioral health center, and I feel like I have a newfound purpose. I want to go into a profession where I can help somebody. So we have the first sort of 6 months of 2013. And we see Zephan in counseling, we see Zephan going to Dr. Stilson, we see Zephan getting on medications. He's engaged with the system. We have to remember that at this time, Zephan is living at his mother, Misty's house, and we have Bruce Bannister. Then, June of 13 through January of 2014, Zephan falls off the grid. He's not seeing Mr. O'Connell. He's not seeing Dr. Stilson for medications. And what do we find out in January of 2014? The nurse's visits start. Zephan is there. He's having headaches. He's having panic attacks. He's having problems. He's at the nurse's office on an almost daily basis. So the school intervenes. They say, something is going on here. He's here all the time. We have to do something about this. So they reach out to Patrick O'Connell. Patrick O'Connell goes to the school to do therapy with kids, and they say, we know that Zephan had been seeing Patrick. Let's talk to Patrick, see what Patrick can help us out with. And when they reach out to Patrick, they say, and we can't get a hold of his parents. So Patrick has Misty's phone number in his phone from back 6 months earlier when they were engaged in the therapeutic process. Patrick calls Misty, she gets her on the phone, he gets her on the phone, Misty's in Las Vegas. Do you recall the physical description that Patrick O'Connell gave of Zephan when he met with him at the school that day in January? He was pale, he was sickly, he was shaky. The counseling with Patrick had stopped. He hadn't seen him for 6 months. And then we come to find out Misty had taken Zephan off the medications. He'd been off for 4 months. So now we're re-engaged. We have Patrick. The school is concerned. And Zephan gets back to Dr. Stilson's office, and they are treating him for depression. They are treating him for anxiety. And Dr. Stilson and Patrick O'Connell communicate, and this is in the records. They said, things are not going well, and Zephan is at risk to fall off the grid. The nurse visits continue. Therapy with Patrick continues at school. Zephan is failing all of his classes. He's not doing his work, and he is having homicidal thoughts about torture and death. And we come to February 20th, the day of the dream. Zephan's in one of his visits at the nurse's office. He wakes up from a dream, and he goes and tells the nurse, Dawn Campbell, I'm scared. I had this dream that I barricaded kids in a classroom and I killed them. I'm scared. So, Zephan is taken to the Behavioral Health Center, where he sees Dr. Raster, that the government's experts spoke so highly of. And they say at the Behavioral Health Center, he's not a danger to himself, he's not a danger to anybody else, let him go. That same day. The next day, they get him to Dr. Stilson's office. And Dr. Stilson's office is so concerned about Zephan's mental state that they don't just say, hey, Mom, Misty, we think you might want to try the hospital again. They say, police, come and get Zephan, escort him to an emergency room so he can be evaluated and cleared to take back to the hospital. Zephan tells Dr. Stilson's office, I'm hearing voices. Finally, the February 21st, this is now the day after the dream, the Behavioral Health Center decides to take him, and Zephan tells them, I'm hearing voices. Melissa Mangus, she was the guidance counselor, the school counselor that we heard from. And her words are so important. They are so important. She said, Zephan is reaching out for help. He told us about the dream. He's scared. She said he would talk about the visions and thoughts. And remember, Melissa is seeing him not just on the day of the dream, but she has been seeing him. He goes to her office as well. He would talk about the visions and the thoughts, the voices in his head, telling him things he was uncomfortable with, he didn't like, and he was scared of. Ms. Mangus was asked, did Zephan flat out ask for help? Her answer, yes. Yes. He said, I just want them to stop. Make them go away. I don't want to do these things. I don't want to be this way. Ms. Mangus also told us, kids say scary, dark things. They sure do. They say them to maybe get attention. They say it maybe because they enjoy saying scary, dark things. But this was not Zephan. She said you could see the fear in his eyes. He didn't know what to do with these thoughts and feelings. She said it was big, scary stuff, and he didn't know how to handle it. She said Misty wanted to help but didn't know how. It was hard for Zephan to focus on his schoolwork and his mental health issues when there was no support at home. The home life was lonely for him. Ms. Mangus says the mental health system that we have failed him. He was just trying to survive. So, Zephan is at the Behavioral Health Center in February, and he gets in a fight with another kid. This idea has been presented to you that Zephan is who he is, and it was him not wanting to be helped, and that is why he is who he is. Well, and they said that, we're just waiting for the juvenile justice system to get involved. Maybe that would help. Well, here was an opportunity. Here was an opportunity. It wasn't Zephan's decision not to be charged with punching the other kid and causing him to have to go get stitches. It was a missed opportunity. So Zephan is discharged February 28th, and now the school, understandably, does not want Zephan there, so he's out of school. A few days later, 10 days later, he's back at the Behavioral Health Center, this time because of the fight between Josh and Zephan when Department of Children and Family Services got involved. He's discharged on March 12th because he punches a hole in the wall. Here again, here's an opportunity. You want the juvenile justice system involved? He just punched a hole in the wall. He's damaged our property. It didn't happen. And Dr. Raster, again, the one who writes, you can see in the records, very unpleasant things about Zephan, to be sure. Calls him a behavior problem. He doesn't want him there. He doesn't want Zephan at the Behavioral Health Center. He was discharging him. And Barb Zudema, the woman who worked for the insurance company, you heard what she said. She intervened and said, get him transported to a different hospital. He's not in a place where he should be going home. And so another hospital took him in. And he was there for about 7 days. And we see Patrick O'Connell writing a letter. Zephan needs residential treatment. These acute stays, this outpatient counseling, this is not working. This problem is more serious. We see Dr. Stilson writing letters. This is not working. This is more serious. He needs residential treatment. But he's discharged from Epworth on March 20th with no residential treatment. He's going back home to be with Misty and Bruce. Zephan turns 17 on April 2nd, a couple weeks later, and he has a few more appointments with Patrick, and he has some appointments with the psychiatrist at the Bowen Center. And Dr. Stilson, Patrick O'Connell, Melissa Mangus, they tried so hard to help. They did. They did. They tried so hard to help because they knew that Zephan was in danger of falling off the grid. And that's what happened. Zephan's not in school. He can't keep a job. He tries the Army. He tries the Army when he turns 18. That doesn't work because a fresh start going to the Army, the voices, the thoughts, they went with Zephan to the Army. He didn't get to leave those behind. They went with him. And he tried for a few weeks, and it comes out, I'm having homicidal thoughts. He tells people again, I'm having homicidal thoughts. Yes, he did not disclose his mental health history on his application to the Army. But once he's there and it becomes overwhelming, he tells them, and then it all comes out, and he tells them all about it. He tells them everything. So the Army doesn't work. He's back at home in Indiana in December of 2016. His best friend Chandler dies. And there are no records from this time after the Army. Does that mean Zephan is doing better? I would say look at what Zephan is doing online, and there's your answer. Zephan is clearly not doing better. And we get to March of 2017 and Erica Chevalot's report to the Michigan State Police. Does the fact that Zephan was not going to counseling and was not on medication in March of 2017 mean that Zephan was not mentally ill? Does it mean he didn't want help? No, it doesn't. Clearly, look at what he said to Erica Chevalot. Look at the messages. The state has read them I don't know how many times. Zephan is not okay. He is sick. His brain is not healthy. We heard several times, well, he wasn't in treatment then. He wasn't going to counseling. He wasn't taking his medications. Does that mean he isn't still suffering? That he isn't mentally ill? Look at what he's doing online. The move to Florida, another try at a fresh start, new house, new job, new car. The voices, the thoughts, they did not stay in Indiana. They came with Zephan to Florida. Zephan's parents, Misty and Josh. It has been suggested that as we present this information to you, that what we've done is just place all the blame on Misty and Josh. That is not what we're doing. We're presenting you the information so that you can understand what was going on in Zephan's life as his brain is forming. This is not about blaming them. I said it earlier, the person to blame for what happened in that bank is Zephan, and he knows that. He pled guilty. Zephan's mom, Misty. You heard evidence about her, and you heard from her. I will sum up what you heard and what you saw this way. Misty did the best she could with what she had. When we consider Misty, we have to talk about Bruce Bannister. I was intentionally very gentle with both Misty and Zephan's brother Zach when we spoke of Bruce Bannister. Neither of them was comfortable talking about it, and I certainly wasn't going to push it because there are safety considerations. Misty is once again in a relationship with him, and you heard the testimony, he was here in Florida. I had to be cautious about the violence. And that is the environment in which Zephan grew up. Josh, you heard that he was controlling and abusive since high school. And I will sum up Josh this way. He has not visited, had any contact with his son since he was arrested, and he was not here for this trial. Excuse me. There is mitigation in the circumstances of this crime. And remember, as I told the jury instruction that the judge will read to you says you can find mitigation in the circumstances of this crime, and it's there. Zephan doesn't kill 5 people and run out the door and get away. He stays in the bank. He calls 911. He is immediately accepting responsibility for what he did. He says, I just killed 5 people. I've been told to kill people since I was 11 years old. I've got the gun against my head. I know what I am doing is wrong. Those are Zephan's words. I can't get them to stop. Deputy Carr on the next call. Zephan tells him, it's wrong what I did. If this is someone who externalizes blame, who wants to blame everyone else for everything, why on earth would he say, it's wrong what I did? He says the voices, I've had them since I was 11. They aren't really talking right now because the gun is against my head. I'm broken. And during the course of this call, Deputy Carr, he fights so hard to keep Zephan alive. And he does. He says to him, it doesn't have to end. Deputy Carr says to him, I'm hoping the doctor can help you. Deputy Carr says to him, you are worth saving. The transactions that Zephan had at the bank. I have to talk about these because it has been suggested to you that Zephan targeted the 5 women, and the evidence just doesn't support it in any way. It contradicts it. If you look at State's Exhibit number 221, on January 7th, on that first occasion that you saw when Zephan goes in the bank to do a transaction, the teller that Zephan does that transaction with is Mr. Wizakowski, the male teller. That's who he does the transaction with. And they're chatting. You don't see any anger. You don't see any confrontation. And then on January 19th, when Zephan goes to the bank again, Mr. Wizakowski is working that day too. As Zephan goes into the bank, Mr. Wizakowski is working with another couple, so Zephan goes to a different, the teller window right next door to Mr. Wizakowski. So both times that Zephan, that you have, that he went in the bank and did his transactions, Mr. Wizakowski is right there. Zephan knows there is a male teller that works at this bank. We also heard, but he waited until the male customer leaves so that there would be only women in the bank. Again, the evidence says otherwise because Mr. Wizakowski testified. I went in the bank with my lunch. Remember, I think it was Checkers. He went out to get his lunch. He goes in the bank. He talks to the male customer that we see then go out, get in his car, and leave. So Zephan knows as he's sitting there, there is another male customer. There is another man in this bank. This is not targeting women. That's a nice narrative for the government. I can see why they want you to believe it, but it's not what the evidence shows. So the video at the bank. There is confusion in Zephin's brain. There is disorganization. And how do we know that? Because he says, I am dying today. He says that to Amani. He says to Chandler, I'll see you in hell. But he wears a vest. He wears a vest so that if he's shot, presumably, he would not be killed. You see him kneeling down by that desk. The state says with some sort of tactical advantage. He's got a gun to his head. He puts the gun to his head. But then, when he goes in the back office, he takes the vest off. Zephin doesn't know. Does he want to die? Does he not want to die? He doesn't know. But Zephin complies with all of the commands when he, at the end of the call with Deputy Carr, he complies with the commands. He puts his hands up. He lifts his shirt up. He walks out. He turns around. He kneels down. He's arrested. You see this struggle in Zephin's mind. Kill myself, be killed, want to live. In the interrogation, Zephin answers their questions. He tells them, I've been hearing these voices since I was 11 years old. I've tried to find a job that will give me the chain of command, like a prison, like the army, that will tell me what to do. Zephin cries. He cries. He says, every time the gun was against my head, the voices would stop. He says, I should have died that day on the roof with the rope around my neck. I wish I would have drank the weed killer. I wish I would have shot myself before I went to the bank. I wanted to shoot myself every night since I got the gun. So the voices. Dr. Macklis told you, sometimes Zephin reports the voices, sometimes he talks about the voices, sometimes he talks about the thoughts. Dr. Macklis told you he is unable to distinguish between the two. Dr. Macklis told you Zephin has reported these voices when there's no secondary gain. He's not getting anything out of it. He's telling people this is what's going on. He told you about the testing data that he did that show that Zephin is answering these questions that show he has the voices. And Zephin certainly did not wait until January 23rd of 2019 on the 911 call to say for the first time, there are voices in my head. One of Patrick O'Connell's notes was significant to Dr. Macklis from December of 2012. Patrick O'Connell wrote, "It is very difficult for me to tell if he was dreaming about the violence, wanting to do violence towards others, or was actively hallucinating that violence was happening. His language and how he describes it seem to combine all three." Zephin is unable to distinguish. Is he having these voices? Is he having these thoughts? But we know this. We know they are scary to him. The government's witness, Dr. Pritchard, told you that he doesn't believe that Zephin has auditory hallucinations. And he said, because if he did, he would be acting like that unmedicated schizophrenic that you see wandering around on the sidewalk. That's what he said. He said that a couple times. Because that's how a person, Dr. Pritchard said, with auditory hallucinations must behave. We have never said to you that Zephin is an unmedicated schizophrenic wandering around on the street talking to himself. We have never said that. If we had, I can see where Dr. Pritchard's testimony about that would make sense. Because Zephin did not act like that. But what we have presented to you is evidence that documents that going back for 10 years prior to the murders, that Zephin was reporting having homicidal thoughts, that he was reporting the voices, that he was reporting dreams and thoughts of violence and gore, and it scared him. Major depressive disorder with psychotic features is an explanation for the voices. So is the tumor in his brain. So is the fact that this is how he has learned to cope with these thoughts over these years. These thoughts that are constantly in his head. These thoughts, these are not a defense. We didn't say to you, find Zephan not guilty by reason of insanity because of these thoughts. We didn't say that. They are what is going on inside his head. Zephan accepted responsibility for what is going on inside his head by pleading guilty. And I'll turn back to Amani for another moment. She said, Zephan didn't ever show a lot of emotion, never really excited about anything. That Zephan didn't specifically refer to voices in their conversations, but he would be these different people. And what Amani said, and what you see in her texts, is when Zephan is texting her, messaging with her on the morning of the murders, Amani says, "You're not even talking like Zephan." For 10 years, Zephan had these thoughts, these voices, and they get darker and scarier. And they tell him to hurt people. They tell him to kill people. They tell him to hurt himself. And he tries. He tries on the roof with the rope, with the weed killer. But it's in his head, the thoughts, the voices. He's getting intervention, therapy with Patrick, some medication, but it's not consistent. And is it our expectation really that this seriously mentally ill child is supposed to pull himself up by his bootstraps and recognize that he just needs to stick to the therapy without the parental guidance to lead him there? The state says just do your homework and everything will be fine. Does doing your homework make the homicidal thoughts go away? The voices, the dark thoughts, they continue. Zephan medicated himself with video games. I'm not saying video games are to blame for this. I'm saying that's what he did. He holed himself up in the room and he played video games. And Dr. Garbarino told you that playing these first-person shooter games, they lower a person's inhibition to kill. That's why the military uses them as a training tool. The military also puts the protective factors in place, certainly. Zephan, after 10 years of struggling, telling people about it, he takes the hint, he gets the message. This isn't stopping. I don't know how to deal with this. I'll engage with it, see if it makes it go away. But it gets stronger. And this dangerous game is played out over and over until Zephan is worn down by them and the violence becomes real. We brought you the witnesses, the people that knew Zephan, that loved him, that counseled him, that medicated him. We brought you these people who were actually involved in Zephan's life, not just people evaluating him and looking at him when he's facing the death penalty. But we did present you with these 3 experts to help you make your decision. And Dr. Garbarino, he was the psychology professor specializing in this adolescent brain development, author of 26 books about it. And he told you the brain is not fully developed when you're 21 years old. The science shows it's more around 25 that happens. And that's why he said we use this idea of emerging adulthood. Dr. Garbarino told you about the ACEs, the Adverse Childhood Experience instrument, that you can get a top score of 10 items. And what this is important for is telling us how a child who is exposed to these experiences, how it affects their brain development. And he spoke of each adverse childhood experience as being like a rock that a person carries around in a backpack. You remember that? The rocks in the backpack. And we know from Dr. Mackless's testimony that Zephin's score is 7. He is struggling under the weight of 7 rocks in his backpack. This score is a reflection of about what is going on in Zephin's life, what was going on in his life as a child. It's a reflection of how Zephin sees himself, how he internalizes what's going on, how he interacts with the world. There isn't a mental health score. There's only a person's mental health. And Zephin was not healthy. If there's any question about it, look what he's doing online. Dr. Mark Rubino, the board-certified neurologist that we presented to you, who looked at the scans. He looked at the scan from 2013 with the football hit, and then we had the additional imaging done in the last couple of years. Dr. Rubino actually met with Zephin, evaluated him, performed a full neurological exam, reviewed records. He recognized that something was going on with Zephin, and then when he saw the images, it made sense. There's a tumor in Zephin's brain. You saw it on the screen. We put the box around it so you can see the white mark on the screen. It's there. It's growing. And it's in the area of his brain responsible for processing language. Dr. Rubino identified this as a tumor because of how it looks, its appearance, because of it growing, and because of the fact that there is this increased metabolic activity that we see in the PET scan in the area of the brain where the tumor is. He sees the clinical correlation between what he saw in his exam and in reviewing the records and what he is seeing on the pictures. And, you know, the government wants you to discard his testimony because we hired him as part of our investigation. And they want you to believe their expert who says, I reviewed the images, did not do an evaluation, did not review the records, doesn't have the clinical correlation. And this expert acknowledges that there is something there in his brain. He can see it. It's there. But he doesn't want to call it a tumor. The government even tried to get you to believe, through this expert, that we had manipulated the images. Do you remember that? Selectively choosing what to show you, doing the thing with the brightening. He said, well, you can brighten it and, you know, you could just make it look worse than it is. But when confronted with that accusation on cross-examination, he had to admit, oh yeah, I didn't just look at this one image, not just the one that we showed you. There are 235 images from the PET scan. And I am confident that if one of them had shown that we were manipulating, that we were falsifying what we were presenting to you, you would have heard about it. And their expert had to admit that. Yeah, I said that, but there is actually no evidence of that whatsoever. So when you deliberate, you will be told, consider expert testimony just like you would any other witness, judge their credibility, judge the fact that he tried to convince you all that we were manipulating evidence, but had to admit that we weren't. The final expert we presented to you was Dr. Scott Mackless, the board-certified clinical psychologist. Dr. Mackless reviewed thousands of pages of records, interviews, reports, depositions, the audio, the video, the social media, the online chats. He met with Zephan 4 different times to gather information. He spoke to numerous friends and family members. He got a license to practice in the state of Indiana so that he could do the work that he needed to do up there. Hundreds of hours working on this complex case. The purpose of Dr. Mackless was to synthesize the information that we had presented to you in the preceding 3 days, to put it together and present it to you and why it's important. And he did that through calm, measured testimony. He talked to you about the genetic components of mental illness, that we have that through both sides of Zephan's parents. Dr. Mackless was an aid to help you understand how the experiences in Zephan's life shaped his brain and shaped how he interacts with this world. The state presented you with Dr. Pritchard. And Dr. Pritchard said to you, the medications that Zephan is on in the jail, from the doctor who works at the jail, where he lives, and where they observe him constantly, he's diagnosed him with psychosis, so they treat him with an antipsychotic medication. And it works. And they diagnosed him with depression, and he's on a medication for that, and it works. He's being treated. He isn't violent. He isn't threatening, now that he's on a medication combination that works. He voluntarily takes his medications every day. No behavior problems at the jail. He's a model inmate. Dr. Pritchard talked about Zephan externalizing blame, blaming other people, always blaming others. If he was doing that, if Zephan was doing that, he would not have pled guilty. Dr. Pritchard relied heavily on Dr. Raster's notes from the Behavioral Health Center, the same doctor who wanted him kicked out, and Barb Zudema with the insurance company had to intervene. Dr. Pritchard admitted that just because there are no records after the Army that say Zephan had a mental illness doesn't mean he did not. Dr. Pritchard testified extensively about the online messaging. He said Zephan sounds angry. He talks about these violent, intrusive thoughts. He talks about the imagery of the people with the violent wounds. Is this a person whose mental health is healthy? Is failure to engage in the mental health system proof that a person isn't mentally ill? And then we have the government's witness, Dr. Lazaro. It's hard to know what to say. I would ask that you judge her credibility just like you would any other witness. She disagrees with everyone who said Zephan was mentally ill when he was a child. She disagrees with the government's own other expert, Dr. Pritchard, who said, yes, Zephan had depression when he was a kid. She wants you to believe that she is right because she is the best. Her words, not mine. She wants you to believe that Zephan just has personality disorders. Even if she is right, and I don't for a minute believe that she was, but even if she is right, the mental disorders, the personality disorders that she says Zephan has, she treats them in her practice every day. She treats them. One particular thing that she said when she was talking about the criteria that that are used to diagnose, and that she used to diagnose with a personality disorder, she said this: they are chameleons. They're able to assimilate into a lot of environments, but it's short-lived. It's very short-lived. They don't do good for long term because they disintegrate. They can't maintain. That's what she said. But Zephan has been incarcerated for almost 5.5 years. And he is a model inmate. No problems at the jail. That's not somebody who has disintegrated and can't maintain. So judge her credibility as you would any other witness. And as you do, recall that she says she can read my mind and your minds. In a civilized, humane society, do we, after careful and considered deliberation, do we kill mentally ill, brain damaged, broken people? I hope not. Does that mean that Zephan doesn't deserve to be punished? Absolutely not. We are asking you to punish him severely. The law says, though, that when you make your determination, you have to take into consideration his damage. Sentencing Zephan to life in prison without the possibility of parole means sending him to prison where he will wait to die. He will never walk a free step again. His prison cell will be his waiting room for death. A vote for death is a vote that will execute every part of his body. Those parts that can do good, those parts of him that are still loved despite what he has done. A vote for death extinguishes that sweet little boy whose picture Michelle Cross still carries in her wallet. It extinguishes that young boy that Karen Cox said she would have been proud to have as her son. It extinguishes the life of the young man who to this day keeps Lori Walters' daughter alive. The government uses the word recommend. You'll see that word. They want to distance you from the harsh, ugly reality of what your vote is. That it is a vote whether or not to kill Zephan. This is not just a recommendation. If there are 5 votes for life, the sentence will be life. But the more you distance yourself from Zephan, if you don't want to look at him, if you don't think about him, if you put the responsibility on somebody else, it's easier to cast that vote that extinguishes his life. The death penalty is reserved for the worst of the worst crimes, and it is reserved for the worst of the worst offenders. The state made their decision to seek the death penalty in this case before they had the evidence that we have presented to you. They want you to be a rubber stamp for their uninformed decision. As a citizen of this state, capital punishment is carried out in your name. You are and should be more than just a rubber stamp for the government's wishes. The worst of the worst offenders are never people who are mentally ill and brain damaged. A vote for death means this case is not over. It goes on for years, decades. The violence continues for everyone. A vote for life, it means it's over. It's done. The violence will stop. You were provided with statements. You heard the testimony from the family members, friends, and colleagues of the victims. And you have been instructed by the judge, and you will again, you will be told that you cannot consider that in weighing the aggravators and the mitigators and making your decision. This information is not an aggravating factor. This information is presented to you because we, as a society, consider life to be sacred. And these statements are a way of honoring the victims and to help their family and friends in their grief. You do not weigh their lives against Zefan's life. It's improper. I'm asking you not to do that. The law does not permit it. The idea was brought up in jury selection by a few folks that, well, I think sentencing to death would be more merciful. That is not an aggravating factor. That is not one of the reasons you can choose to vote for death. Please do not vote for death because you find it to be more merciful. Another issue that was brought up, financial issues. The concept that whether it costs more to put a person in prison or to give them the death penalty, the law this is not a financial consideration. This is not a consideration for you to take into account in making your determination about punishment. The concept of financial issues may have everything to do with society, but it does not have anything to do with this case and what your sentence is for Zefan. If any of these inappropriate things happen during your deliberations, these reasons for death that are not allowed by the law, if you hear it happening, you have to step in and say, stop, we're not allowed to consider that. You have a duty and an obligation to make sure that you are following that law and that your fellow jurors are following that law. Whatever your heart, whatever your moral compass tells you to do, you must respect your fellow jurors' decisions, even if you disagree. You said you would do this, that you would respect each other, even if you disagree, or you wouldn't be here. In the penalty phase, the law anticipates that people are going to have different views. So the law does not require 12 votes for the same punishment. There is no mistrial, there is no hung jury. You agreed that you would respect each other's decisions. The jury room is not a place for pressure, it's not a place for coercion, it's not a place for bullying. If that happens, you step in and say that's not allowed. We encourage you, hear each other out, deliberate, carefully consider, but you have to make your own decision. If you have arrived at a point where your individual moral assessment is that life is the right sentence for you, you are required by law to vote that way. A moral determination that life is appropriate means nothing if you don't vote that way. You have to actually take the step and say, I am doing this. It is human nature to avoid difficult decisions, to want to step back and let the others, the ones with the louder voices, take over. It's a more pleasant way to go through life, certainly. But you have to make a choice. If you are voting for life, the only way your vote means anything is if you are one of 5. That's how a life sentence happens. 5 votes for life. You've heard me say this. You are never required to vote for death. Not in this case, not in any case, not in the worst case you could imagine it. Every one of you said you could do that. You could vote for life, even in this case, even if the aggravators are proven. Mercy alone is a reason to vote for life. Shakespeare spoke of mercy so beautifully. when he wrote, "The quality of mercy is not straight. It droppeth as the gentle rain from heaven upon the place beneath. It is twice blessed. It blesseth him that gives and him that takes. It blesseth him that gives." Mercy is not earned. It is not deserved. It is bestowed. Mercy is what makes us civilized. Granting Zephan mercy says far more about you than it will ever say about Zephan. Were there things in Zephan's life that you wish didn't happen? Were there things in Zephan's life that you wish did happen? Every time you say yes, that is a reason for life. Mitigation is anything you heard, you saw, anything you believe in your heart and in your soul. And you don't have to defend it, and you don't have to explain it. When you look in your heart, when you look in your soul, the right thing, maybe not the popular thing, but the right thing, is the vote for life. If you have to ask yourself, how do I know I'm making the right decision? If you follow the law, you're making the right decision. If you follow what is in your heart and in your soul, you are making the right decision. We ask you to show Zephan what he may least deserve: compassion, grace, and mercy. Compassion is not a limited resource. Grace is not limited. Mercy is not limited. Sentencing Zephan to life is the right thing to do. I have held Zephan's life in my hands for 5 years. I now place his life into yours. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to take a break and give you a few moments to go to the restroom before the court reads you your final instructions. So we'll take a break and we'll see you soon.
All rise, back to the jury.
The court will be in a brief recess. Take a comfort break. Thank you.
rise, members of the jury. You may be seated.
Ladies and gentlemen, the court will be reading instructions to you. The bailiff is going to pass out a copy of what the court will be reading to you to each one of you, so you can read along with the court. You will take these along with your notes back to the jury deliberation room whenever we conclude here this time around. So this time, you take your notes, all right? If you'll go ahead. Thank you. Your packet has a cover sheet, and then the page 2 is the instruction regarding the closing argument, which you have already heard. So we begin then on what your numbered page is 3. Members of the jury, you have heard all the evidence and the argument of counsel. Now, you must decide whether the defendant should be sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole or to death. In making your decision, you must first unanimously determine whether the aggravating factors alleged by the state have been proven beyond a reasonable doubt. An aggravating factor is the only circumstance recognized by Florida law that could result in a defendant receiving the death penalty. An aggravating factor increases the gravity of a crime or the harm to a victim beyond the harm inherent in every first-degree murder. You must not consider any other facts as an aggravating factor other than what has been alleged and proven by the state beyond a reasonable doubt. The aggravating factors alleged by the state are: 1. Zephan Allen Xavier was previously or contemporaneously convicted of another capital felony. The crime of first-degree murder is a capital felony. 2. The first-degree murder was especially heinous, atrocious, or cruel. Heinous means extremely wicked or shockingly evil. Atrocious means outrageously wicked and vile. Cruel means designed to inflict a high degree of pain with utter indifference to or even enjoyment of the suffering of others. The kind of crime intended to be included as especially heinous, atrocious, or cruel is one accompanied by additional acts that show that the crime was conscienceless or pitiless and was unnecessarily torturous to Marisol Lopez and or Deborah Cook and or Anna Maria Williams and or Jessica Montague and or Cynthia Watson. 3. The first-degree murder was committed in a cold, calculated, and premeditated manner without any pretense of moral or legal justification. Cold means the murder was the product of calm and cool reflection. Calculated means having a careful plan or prearranged design to commit murder. A killing is premeditated if it occurs after the defendant consciously decides to kill. The decision must be present in the mind at the time of the killing. The law does not fix the exact period of time that must pass between the formation of the premeditated intent to kill and the killing. The period of time must be long enough to allow reflection by the defendant. The premeditated intent to kill must be formed before the killing. However, for this aggravating factor to apply, a heightened level of premeditation demonstrated by a substantial period of reflection is required. A pretense of moral or legal justification is any claim of justification or excuse that, though insufficient to reduce the degree of murder, nevertheless rebuts the otherwise cold calculated, or premeditated nature of the murder. You have heard evidence about the impact of this murder on the family, friends, and community of Marisol Lopez, Deborah Cook, Anna Maria Williams, Jessica Montague, and Cynthia Watson. This evidence was presented to show the victim's uniqueness as an individual and the resultant loss caused by the death of Marisol Lopez, Deborah Cook, Anna Maria Williams, Jessica Montague, and Cynthia Watson. However, you may not consider this evidence as an aggravating factor. The state has the burden to prove an aggravating factor beyond a reasonable doubt. A reasonable doubt is not a mere possible doubt, a speculative, imaginary, or forced doubt. Such a doubt must not influence you to disregard an aggravating factor if you have an abiding conviction that it exists. On the other hand, if after carefully considering, comparing, and weighing all the evidence, you do not have an abiding conviction that the aggravating factor exists, or if having a conviction, it is one which is not stable, but one which wavers and vacillates, then the aggravating factor has not been proved beyond a reasonable doubt. A reasonable doubt as to the existence of an aggravating factor may arise from the evidence, a conflict in the evidence, or the lack of evidence. If you have a reasonable doubt as to the existence of an aggravating factor, you must find that it does not exist. However, if you have no reasonable doubt, you should find the aggravating factor does exist. A finding that an aggravating factor exists must be unanimous. That is, all of you must agree that the alleged aggravating factor exists. You will be provided a form to make this finding as to each alleged aggravating factor, and you should indicate whether you find the aggravating factor has been proved beyond a reasonable doubt. If you do not unanimously find that at least one aggravating factor was proven by the state beyond a reasonable doubt, then the defendant is not eligible for the death penalty and your deliberations are complete. If, however, you unanimously find that at least one aggravating factor has been proven beyond a reasonable doubt, then the defendant is eligible for the death penalty and you must consider additional matters to determine whether the appropriate penalty should be life in prison without the possibility of parole or death. First, each of you must determine whether any mitigating circumstances exist. A mitigating circumstance is not limited to the facts surrounding the crime. A mitigating circumstance may include any aspect of the defendant's character, background, or life, or any circumstance of the offense that may indicate the death penalty is not appropriate in this case. It is the defendant's burden to prove that one or more mitigating circumstances exist. Mitigating circumstances need not be proven beyond a reasonable doubt. Instead, the defendant need only prove a mitigating circumstance by the greater weight of the evidence, which means evidence that more likely than not tends to establish the existence of a mitigating circumstance. If you determine by the greater weight of the evidence that a mitigating circumstance exists, you must consider it proven and give that evidence such weight as you determine it should receive. You need not reach a unanimous decision about whether the defendant has proven the existence of a mitigating circumstance. Any juror persuaded as to the existence of a mitigating circumstance must consider it in this case. Among the mitigating circumstances you may consider are: 1. Zephan Xavier has family and friends who love and support him, and he has the ability to maintain those relationships. 2. Zephan Xavier has had a positive influence on others while incarcerated. 3. Zephan Xavier's age at the time of the crime. 4. Zephan Xavier has no significant history of prior criminal activity. 5. Zephan Xavier has a tumor in his brain. 6. Zephan Xavier has a history of depression, anxiety, panic attacks, and auditory hallucinations. 7. Zephan Xavier has had multiple psychiatric hospitalizations. 8. Zephan Xavier suffers from depression with psychotic features. 9. There is a history of mental illness in Zephan Xaver's family. 10. Zephan Xaver has a genetic risk for mental disorders. 11. Zephan Xaver has a history of homicidal thoughts. 12. Zephan Xaver has a history of suicidal thoughts and acts. 13. Zephan Xaver did not receive the psychiatric care and medication or therapy and counseling that he needed as a child. 14. Zephan Xaver has been voluntarily taking psychiatric medication, including antipsychotics, during his incarceration. 15. The first-degree murder was committed while Zephan Xaver was under the influence of extreme mental or emotional disturbance. 16. The first-degree murder was committed while Zephan Xaver was under the influence of mental or emotional disturbance. 17. The capacity of Zephan Xaver to appreciate the criminality of his conduct or to conform his conduct to the requirements of law was substantially impaired. 18. The capacity of Zephan Xaver to appreciate the criminality of his conduct or to conform his conduct to the requirements of law was impaired. 19. The brain is not fully developed at 21 years of age. 20. Zephan Xaver's development as a child was adversely affected due to unstable, abusive, and disrupted parental relationships. 21. Zephan Xaver's father was physically and emotionally abusive while Zephan was a child. 22. Zephan Xaver's mother was neglectful and exposed him to domestic violence while Zephan was a child. 23. Zephan Xaver's home life was unstable. 24. Zephan Xaver has accepted responsibility for his crimes. 25. Zephan Xaver has shown remorse. 26. Zephan Xaver has embraced Christianity. 27. The existence of any other factors in Zephan Xaver's background that would mitigate against imposition of the death penalty. 28. Zephan Xaver is a human being. The final step in the process is for the jury to determine whether the defendant should be sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole or to death. In making your decision, you must weigh all of the following factors. 1. Whether sufficient aggravating factors exist, and 2. Whether the proven aggravating factors outweigh the proven mitigating circumstances. The process of weighing aggravating factors and mitigating circumstances is not a mechanical or mathematical process. In other words, you should not merely total the number of aggravating factors and compare that number to the total number of mitigating circumstances. The law contemplates that different factors or circumstances may be given different weight or values by different jurors. Therefore, in your decision-making process, each individual juror must decide what weight is to be given to a particular aggravating factor or mitigating circumstance. Regardless of the results of each juror's individual weighing process, even if you conclude that the sufficient aggravators outweigh the mitigators, the law neither compels nor requires you to recommend that the defendant should be sentenced to death. If fewer than 8 jurors vote for the death penalty, the court must sentence the defendant to life in prison without the possibility of parole. If 8 or more jurors vote for the death penalty, your recommendation must be for the death penalty. This recommendation is not binding on the court. However, I am required to assign and give great weight and deference to your recommendation. You will be provided a form to reflect your decisions. The fact that the jury can make its decision on a single ballot should not influence you to act hastily or without due regard to the gravity of these proceedings. Before you vote, you should carefully consider and weigh the evidence, realizing that a human life is at stake, and bring your best judgment to bear in reaching your decision. Weighing the evidence. It is up to you to decide what evidence is reliable. You should use your common sense in deciding which is the best evidence and which evidence should not be relied upon in considering your verdict. You may find some of the evidence not reliable or less reliable than other evidence. You should consider how the witnesses acted as well as what they said. Some things you should consider are: 1. Did the witness seem to have an opportunity to see and know the things about which the witness testified? 2. Did the witness seem to have an accurate memory? 3. Was the witness honest and straightforward in answering the attorney's questions? 4. Did the witness have some interest in how the case should be decided? 5. Does the witness's testimony agree with the other testimony and other evidence in the case? 6. Did the witness at some other time make a statement that is inconsistent with the testimony he or she gave in court? Whether the state has met its burden of proof as to the existence of any aggravating factor does not depend upon the number of witnesses it has called or upon the number of exhibits it has offered, but instead upon the nature and quality of the evidence presented. Whether the defense has met its burden of proof as to the existence of any mitigating circumstance does not depend upon the number of witnesses it has called or upon the number of exhibits it has offered, but instead upon the nature and quality of the evidence presented. The fact that a witness is employed in law enforcement does not mean that his or her testimony deserves more or less consideration than that of any other witness. Expert witnesses are like other witnesses with one exception. The law permits an expert witness to give his or her opinion. However, an expert's opinion is reliable only when given on a subject about which you believe him or her to be an expert. Like other witnesses, you may believe or disbelieve all or any part of an expert's testimony. It is entirely proper for a lawyer to talk to a witness about what testimony the witness would give if called to the courtroom. The witness should not be discredited by talking to a lawyer about his or her testimony. You may rely upon your own conclusion about the credibility of any witness. A juror may believe or disbelieve all or any part of the evidence or the testimony of any witness. The defendant not testifying. The Constitution requires the state to prove the existence of an aggravating factor. It is not necessary for the defendant to disprove the existence of an aggravating factor. It is up to the state to prove the existence of an aggravating factor by evidence. The defendant exercised a fundamental right by choosing not to be a witness in this death penalty proceeding. You must not view this as an admission of the existence of any aggravating factor or factors, an admission that no mitigating circumstances exist, an admission that any aggravating factor or factors are sufficient, an admission that any aggravating factor or factors outweigh any mitigating circumstances, or an admission that a sentence of death should be recommended. You must not be influenced in any way by his decision. No juror should ever be concerned that the defendant did or did not take the witness stand to give testimony in a death penalty proceeding. Rules for deliberation. These are some general rules that apply to your discussion. You must follow these rules in order to return a lawful verdict. 1. You must follow the law as it is set out in these instructions. If you fail to follow the law, your verdict will be a miscarriage of justice. There is no reason for failing to follow the law in this case. All of us are depending on you to make a wise and legal decision in this matter. 2. This case must be decided only upon the evidence that you've heard from the testimony of the witnesses and have seen in the form of the exhibits and evidence in these instructions. 3. This case must not be decided for or against anyone because you feel sorry for anyone or are angry at anyone. 4. Remember, the lawyers are not on trial. Your feelings about them should not influence your decision in this case. 5. Your duty is to determine, in accord with the law, if the state has proven the existence of one or more aggravating factors, and if so, whether one or more mitigating circumstances exist, and whether the aggravating factor or factors are sufficient, and if so, whether the aggravating factor or factors found to exist outweigh any mitigating factor or factors found to exist, And if so, whether the defendant should be sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole or death. 6. Your verdict as to the existence of any aggravating factor must be unanimous. That is, each juror must agree to the same verdict as to the existence of any aggravating factor. 7. Your verdict should not be influenced by feelings of prejudice, bias, or sympathy. Your verdict must be based on the evidence and on the law contained in these instructions. A cautionary instruction. Determining the existence and weight of any aggravating factor or mitigating circumstance and recommending a sentence is, in this proceeding, exclusively your job. I cannot participate in your decision in any way. Please disregard anything I may have said or done that made you think I prefer any particular finding or recommendation over any other. Verdict. As to each aggravating factor alleged, you may find that the aggravating factor has been proven to exist beyond a reasonable doubt or has not been proven to exist beyond a reasonable doubt. Again, your verdict as to the existence of an aggravating factor must be unanimous. If you find the state has proven beyond a reasonable doubt the existence of one or more aggravating factors alleged, each of you must then consider whether one or more mitigating circumstances exist. Weigh whether the proven aggravating factor or factors are sufficient and whether the proven aggravating factor or factors outweigh any proven mitigating circumstances, and if so, whether Zephan Xaver should be sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole or death. If 8 or more jurors vote for the death penalty, your recommendation must be for the death penalty. If fewer than 8 jurors vote for the death penalty, your recommendation must be for a penalty of life in prison without the possibility of parole. If you find the state has failed to prove the existence of any aggravating factor, your deliberations have concluded. The verdict must be in writing, and for your convenience, the necessary verdict forms have been prepared for you. They are as follows. Now, because there will be one official verdict, I did not provide each of you a sample copy. So listen carefully to what I'm about to read to you. You will take the verdict with you, and then I'll give you some more instructions in just a few moments. Your document will be entitled, it'll have the same style of the case at the top and say verdict penalty phase. The next page says, we, the jury, find as follows as to Zephan Allen Xaver in this case, : as to count 1, Marisol Lopez is in parenthesis. A, aggravating factors. We, the jury, unanimously find the state proved beyond a reasonable doubt that Zephan Allen Xaver was previously or contemporaneously convicted of another capital felony, select only one. Beneath that sentence is a line next to the word yes, beneath which is a line next to the word no. Next, we, the jury, unanimously find the state proved beyond a reasonable doubt that the first-degree murder was especially heinous, atrocious, or cruel, select only one. Beneath that is a line next to the word yes, followed by a line next to the word no. Then, we, the jury, unanimously find the state proved beyond a reasonable doubt that the first-degree murder was committed in a cold, calculated, and premeditated manner without any pretense of moral or legal justification. Select only one, beneath which is a line next to the word yes, followed by a line next to the word no. If you, the jury, answered no to every aggravating factor listed, you have completed your deliberations as to count 1 and must proceed to count 2. If you, the jury, answered yes to any aggravating factor listed in count 1, proceed to section B as to count 1. Following that sentence is B, jury recommendation. If fewer than 8 jurors vote for the death penalty, your recommendation must be for a penalty of life in prison without the possibility of parole. If 8 or more jurors vote for the death penalty, your recommendation must be for the death penalty. Following that, it says select only one. We, the jury, have unanimously found the state proved one or more aggravating factors. Each of us has considered whether one or more mitigating circumstances exist. Each of us has weighed whether the proven aggravating factor, parenthesis S, is or sufficient, and whether the proven aggravating factor, parenthesis S, outweigh any proven mitigating circumstances. We have further considered whether Zephan Allen Xavier should be sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole or death. Select only one, beneath which is a line next to the words, "We, the jury, find Zephan Allen Xavier should be sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole," beneath which is a line next to, "We, the jury, find by a vote of blank to blank that Zephan Allen Xavier should be sentenced to death." The verdict continues in the same way as to each of the 5 individuals. As to count 2, Deborah Cook, the same sentences with regard to the aggravating factors, the same sentences with regard to the aggravating factors. If you find no, you are concluded as to that count. If you find yes, you proceed to B as to count 2, following which is the jury recommendation sentence as to Deborah Cook in this case as well, identically to the earlier in count 1. As to count 3, Anna Williams, the same 2 pages apply as to Marisol Lopez and Deborah Cook. As to Jessica Montague in count 4, the same 2 pages apply as applied to the earlier. And in count 5, as to Cynthia Watson, the same 2 pages apply. The last page of your verdict reflects, dated this blank day of blank 2000 blank in Highlands County, Florida. There's a line for the signature of the foreperson, followed by a line for the jury number of the foreperson. That 12-page document will be sent back with you in its blank format for you to reflect what I told you earlier, which was that the forms have been prepared for you, and that is the substance of each of the forms. Now, single defendant, multiple counts. Separate crimes were charged, and separate verdicts are required for each count of the indictment. Although this penalty proceeding related to all 5 counts, each count and the evidence applicable to it must be considered separately, and separate findings as to the aggravating factors and a separate recommendation must be returned as to each. Findings and recommendations as to one count must not affect your findings and recommendation as to any other count. Submitting the case to the jury. In just a few moments, you will be taken to the jury room by the bailiff. The first thing you should do is choose a foreperson who will preside over your deliberations. The foreperson should see to it that your discussions are carried on in an organized way and that everyone has a fair chance to be heard. It is also the foreperson's job to sign and date the verdict forms when all of you have reached a verdict, and to bring the verdict forms back into the courtroom when you return. During deliberations, jurors must communicate about the case only with one another and only when all jurors are present in the jury room. If a juror goes to the restroom, the deliberations should stop until the juror returns. You are not to communicate with any person outside the jury about this case. Until you have reached a verdict, you must not talk about this case in person or through the telephone, writing, or electronic communication, such as a blog, Twitter, email, text message, or any other means. Do not contact anyone to assist you during deliberations. These communications rules apply until I discharge you at the end of the case. If you become aware of any violation of these instructions or any other instruction I have given you in this case, you must tell me by giving a note to the bailiff. Many of you have cell phones, tablets, laptops, or other electronic devices in the courtroom. The rules do not allow you to bring your phones or any of those types of electronic devices into the jury room. Kindly leave these devices on your seats. Actually, we have a basket, a little square basket that you can drop your cell phone into. And if you have a smartwatch, you will drop it in the basket, and whenever you are done with your deliberations, you will find your item exactly where you laid it in the basket. So leave those devices in your basket where they will be guarded by us, by the bailiff, while you are deliberating. If you need to communicate with me, send a note through the bailiff. If you have voted, do not disclose the actual vote in your note. If you have a question, I will talk with the attorneys before I answer, so it may take some time. You may continue your deliberations while you wait for my answer. I will answer any questions, if I can, in writing or orally here in open court. Now, during the trial, items were received into evidence as exhibits. You may examine whatever exhibits you think will help you in your deliberations. These exhibits will be sent into the jury room with you when you begin to deliberate. Before I go into the closing paragraph, I want to say you will have all of the evidence that's been introduced except a gun, any ammunition, and a knife. So any of the weaponry, if you wish to see it, we will send a note to the bailiff to say we would like to see X. We will bring you in, seat you here. There will be no discussion while the item is shown to you by the bailiff, after which take the item back, you will retire again to continue your deliberations. There will be no discussion amongst yourselves if you are here in the courtroom. Also, a request was made for a board and easel and markers that has already been installed in the jury room. You will also see that one of these large screen TVs has been installed. You will, of course, as one of the items of evidence, there were discs which can be played on that machine. Do not attempt to access the internet. It is totally disabled on that instrument. All you can do is play a disc. That's the only thing you can do. So with that information, we're going to gather all of this and give us a few moments to get that together to send back to you through the bailiff. Now, in closing, let me remind you that it is important that you follow the law spelled out in these instructions in deciding your verdict. There are no other laws that apply to this case. Even if you do not like the laws that must be applied, you must use them. For more than 2 centuries, we have lived by the Constitution and the law. No juror has the right to violate the rules we all share. Now, with that, ladies and gentlemen, you take that copy of your instructions, you take your notepads and pens back with you at this point. You may now retire to consider your verdict. As I say, give us a few moments to get stuff together and send back to you.
May we approach just briefly at the bench?
All rise for the exit of the jury.
If you have the basket is right there. Please put it. Well, we want it right here. We want them to lay it in here.
A lot of them are on the table.
Okay.
Leave
All
your
right.
basket there for us.
Get them all up.
That's good.
Thank you. other matters that need to be taken up?
No, Your Honor.
Nothing further.
Thank you. We will be in recess. Do come up here if you will.